Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we are exploring true crime. It's fascinating, a little unnerving, right? But it's not just about the mystery, it's about why these stories grab us and why we can't turn away.
Hmm.
So to deep dive into this, we've got excerpts from a proposed true crime podcast script,
Mm-hmm.
and then chapters from this book, The Vanishing of Emily Carter.
Yeah.
So we're going to use these to kind of explore why true crime is so captivating, right? And then we'll see how those psychological hooks actually play out in Emily's case.
Yeah, you know what's so fascinating about true crime? It's almost like a mirror.
Oh.
Like to our own psychology, it lets us look at all the dark stuff, the darker parts of human nature
Right.
from a safe distance.
Okay, yeah. So let's get started with this podcast script. It talks about just this explosion of true crime podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Shows like Serial, Crime Junkie, Case File. Have you listened to any of these?
Oh yeah, I've listened to a couple of those.
Do you have any other favorite?
Let me think. I'm trying to remember the names. I think there's one that I really liked. It was about, can't remember.
Yeah, well, we can come back to that. But what's so interesting is the script tries to get at why true crime is so addictive,
Right.
right? And it gives these three main reasons: survival instincts, safe suspense, and then our need to understand justice.
Yeah, and these aren't just, these aren't buzzwords or anything. They're really deeply rooted psychological things. Like mechanisms that have kept humans alive.
Right.
For centuries and kept us engaged.
Right.
So take survival instincts, for instance.
Okay.
When we hear about a crime, especially a violent one, our brains, they kind of go into this, it's like a threat simulation mode.
Okay, yeah.
We start to think, what would I do in that situation? It's almost like a mental rehearsal for potential danger.
I can see that. It's like when you watch a horror movie and you're yelling at the TV, don't go in there. But you know it's not real. But your brain still reacts like it is.
Exactly. And then there's that safe suspense too.
Right.
True crime, it lets us experience the thrill, the unknown, anticipation of danger, but without actually being in harm's way.
Right.
It's kind of like, riding a roller coaster. Your heart's racing, palms are sweating,
Yes.
but you know you're ultimately safe.
So it's a way of experiencing all of that excitement and danger, but vicariously, without the real life consequences.
Precisely. And then you have that need to understand justice.
Right.
We have this deep-seated desire to see, the bad guys punished and the victims, vindicated. True crime stories, they often tap into that need by providing closure.
Right.
Like this sense of order being restored. And as we'll see in Emily Carter's story, that journey toward justice, that can be really compelling.
Okay, so let's get into that story.
Yeah.
So the book starts in Chicago, October 2017. Emily Carter, young journalist, vanishes on a cold night. And these initial clues are like pieces of a puzzle scattered on a table,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you've got the last sighting of Emily. There's this cryptic note on her desk. It says, "Meet at 8, Harbor Cafe, important." Then there's an empty booth at the cafe where she was supposed to meet someone or something.
Oh, wow.
And then there's this detail about Emily constantly checking her phone. It's like, what was so urgent? Was she waiting for a message? Was she trying to reach someone? It really adds to the mystery.
Yeah, it really does. These initial details, they're so crucial because they activate that need for closure. Our brains, we crave answers.
Yeah.
And all these unanswered questions, they create this tension.
Right.
And that pulls us into the story.
Right.
We want to know what happened to Emily,
Yeah.
and we're willing to follow all those little breadcrumbs to figure it out.
It's like we're already becoming amateur detectives.
Yes.
Trying to piece together the puzzle with the investigators.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Chapter 3, A Secret Investigation. The stakes get even higher.
Oh.
We find out that Emily's working on this risky expose investigating this powerful and shady businessman named Victor Langley.
And it's not just any investigation, right?
Yeah.
She leaves these voice recordings
Oh, wow.
for a friend detailing all of her suspicions and her fears.
Oh, that's scary.
And in one recording, she whispers, "I think I'm being followed." Chills.
Oh, yeah.
Just chills.
That's where the safe suspense really kicks in.
Yeah.
We are put in Emily's shoes. We're experiencing all of her fear,
Right.
her uncertainty. It triggers our survival instincts, even though we're safe on our couches.
Right, right. It makes you think, how would you react if you felt like you were being watched, someone was following your every move?
It's a primal fear.
Yeah.
And the book does a great job at tapping into that fear without becoming like gratuitous or anything.
Right.
It makes us feel Emily's vulnerability. And that vulnerability just makes her disappearance even more unsettling.
Right. And then just when the tension is at its peak, boom, another twist. Chapter 4, a break in the case.
Okay.
A burned notebook is discovered. Links Langley to Emily's disappearance.
Wow.
The driver of this black sedan, seen near where Emily was last spotted, tracked down, and guess what?
What?
One of Langley's employees. Things are starting to unravel, but still no Emily. This is where the narrative hooks us. All those initial fragments, they start connecting, right?
Yeah.
They form this more coherent picture, but it's still incomplete.
Right.
We know something terrible has happened, but the full truth, it's just out of reach.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what keeps us turning the page.
Exactly.
It's just, we're going through all of this, right? And that detail about Emily constantly checking her phone at the cafe, like it keeps coming back to me.
Yeah.
What was she looking for? Was she hoping for a message that never came? Was she trying to reach someone? It just adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. And it just plays into our natural tendency as humans. Like, we're always trying to find these patterns.
Right.
We're looking for meaning, especially when things feel chaotic, like out of control. We try to put order on like randomness to find these explanations, that make sense out of the unexplainable.
So even though it's a small detail,
Right.
it speaks to something much larger about how our minds work,
Exactly.
about how we try to make sense of everything around us.
And the book keeps playing with those expectations too. It leads us down one path, and then like suddenly it veers off in a different direction.
Oh.
Like in Chapter 5, The Truth Uncovered. Just when you think Langley's going to get away with it, a new character pops up.
Okay.
Sarah Benson, his former assistant. She becomes the key witness.
Wow.
Revealing that Langley orchestrated the whole thing.
It's that classic insider turning against the powerful figure.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think, like, what were her motivations?
Right.
Was it all about justice?
Right.
Or was there something else going on there? It's interesting how true crime forces us to kind of question, our assumptions about good and evil.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so interesting, right?
Yeah.
They're not just about the crime itself. They're about human behavior.
Right.
The choices people make when they're faced with crazy circumstances.
And what about Emily's resilience? According to the book, she was held captive, like, for almost 2 months.
Wow.
But she survived.
It's a testament to just like the strength of the human spirit.
It is.
And it shows the power of hope.
Yeah.
Even when things are really bad. There's that part of us that believes things can get better.
Right.
That we can get through even the toughest stuff.
It makes you think about the lasting impact of trauma, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
The book doesn't go into detail about her recovery.
Right.
But I can only imagine what she went through.
That's a really good point. While we're focused on the crime and like trying to get justice,
right,
we can't forget about the victims.
Yeah.
And like what they have to go through.
And we should acknowledge, too, that not every story has this, like, happy ending.
Right.
Not every crime is solved.
Yeah.
Not every victim gets justice.
That's true.
But even in those cases, there's something powerful about sharing those stories.
Exactly.
About giving them a voice.
That's where the true power of true crime lies. It's about amplifying those voices, the ones who might be forgotten. It's about raising awareness and inspiring empathy.
So going back to the beginning of our deep dive here, that podcast script we discussed, it highlights how true crime can have a real-world impact. Like shows, Serial, and In the Dark. They've helped bring attention to cold cases, and sometimes it leads to new leads. Right. Even arrests.
Exactly. And it shows how this genre can be more than just entertainment, It can be a tool for justice. It can get the public engaged in these unsolved mysteries.
Right.
And even shine a light on, like, systemic issues.
Right.
Within the justice system.
It's like a collective effort, almost.
Yeah.
Podcasters and listeners working together to try to uncover the truth.
Exactly. And it just speaks to the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
It doesn't just capture our imaginations, but it can also inspire action and even create change.
But there's also that need to be mindful of the ethical stuff, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. It's important to avoid sensationalizing these crimes
Right.
or exploiting the victims,
Right.
in their families.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
We need to approach these stories with respect, with sensitivity,
Right.
recognizing that these are real people
Right.
and real pain.
So as we continue to explore this genre, it's crucial to remember that it's not just about the thrill of the chase. It's about understanding the human stories
Right.
at the heart of these crimes.
Exactly.
And using that understanding
Right.
to advocate for a better world.
Exactly.
We've talked about the psychology behind true crime, like how it just plays on our instincts, our desires.
Right.
And we really delved into Emily Carter's story, all the twists and turns. I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts on all of this? Has this deep dive changed how you see true crime at all?
It's really made me think about the whole genre, like in a deeper way. It's easy to just get caught up in the mystery and everything.
Right.
But you have to remember, these are real stories with real people.
The book doesn't really get into the trial much.
Right.
But it does say that Langley ends up getting convicted, sentenced to life in prison.
Wow.
Does that feel like a satisfying conclusion to you, like justice was served?
I don't know. It's always so complicated. On one hand, he's held accountable, right?
Right.
He doesn't get away with it. But on the other hand, no amount of punishment can really, undo what Emily went through.
Right.
And then there's the question of, were there other victims?
Right.
The book kind of hints that there might be others.
Right.
So does this verdict bring them closure? I don't know.
It brings up those big questions about what justice really means.
Yeah.
Is it about punishment? Is it about rehabilitation? Is it about, giving a voice to those who haven't had one?
And it makes you think about the role of journalism in all of this, too.
Right. Yeah.
Like Emily, she was willing to risk everything to expose this guy.
Yeah.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is. And it reminds us that we all have a role to play in speaking truth to power, fighting for what's right.
Right.
Even when it's hard.
Emily's story, it's a powerful example of resilience and fighting for justice.
Yeah.
But it also shows that, not every story ends this way.
Right.
Not all victims get the closure that they deserve.
Right.
And not all the bad guys are caught.
So how do we balance that, right? Like, our interest in true crime with the pain and suffering that these stories represent?
I think it's about being critical, approaching these stories with empathy, compassion. We have to remember, behind every headline, every podcast, every book, these are real lives. We need to engage with these stories thoughtfully,
right,
responsibly.
I agree. And maybe by doing that, by engaging in a more mindful way, we can help create a world where there are fewer victims,
right,
more stories of, resilience and justice. And for listeners who want more of Emily's story, she actually wrote her own book about what she went through.
Oh, wow. I'd love to read that.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of true crime, let's keep in mind those whose lives have been touched by these stories. Let's remember the victims, the families, the whole communities affected by these events. And let's use this fascination that we have with true crime to advocate for a world that's more just and more compassionate.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.